If you didn't update the model doesn't have any memory, and then there's specificity, which is how many people are we recalling who don't need to be recalled. It's the 27 billion parameter, and that I think needs 4 A100s to run somewhere in that kind of realm. I was fortunate enough to have the opportunity to work at Google, and I've been there. That was about 7 years ago. No, nothing is entirely safe. That's not the world we live in, but is it?
Nothing is entirely secure. Well, I come from the security side. We meet on that, absolutely.
Our primary goal is to see how can we build technology that can give people and scale access to healthcare expertise.
Hi, Rory. I'm really excited to welcome you here to Confidentially Yours, this podcast, and to have you on. So before we do anything else, your name is Rory Pilgrim and you work for Google. But tell us a bit more about that. What's your job title and what does it actually mean? Because job titles can be very deceiving, right? So tell us a bit about yourself.
Thanks. Glad to be here. Really appreciate it. I am a product manager at Google. So that is a somewhat confusing title, I think. But the way it tends to work is it's a non-technical role. So you're not writing a lot of code day to day, but you are thinking about the product and how it should be built and why it should be built. And so it's really thinking about what are the technical capabilities we have at Google, what are the user needs that we can address, and then trying to put those together. So it's a lot of cross-functional, and I hate that word because it sounds a bit of a buzzword. There's talking to a lot of people with a lot of different skill sets. So people from marketing, people from a comms team, a marketing team, engineering, legal. It's a wide range of people that you need to sort of work with to make sure that we can ship products that make our users really happy.
That makes sense. I've worked as a product manager a couple of places, and it was always that sort of cross-functional, as you say. They're talking to lots of different people and trying to express your needs and their needs in ways that make sense to the rest too. And I always found that really interesting. So it's a kind of business and technical facing role. Is that a fair way of putting it?
That's right. It's non-technical in the sense that you're not writing code, but you need to have a good understanding of how it works and what's possible. Otherwise, you're going to be dreaming up scenarios that just won't work. So there's a little bit of technical there, but like I said, you're not sort of responsible for putting out change lists on a day-to-day basis, at least.
And is your background technical? Do you think of yourself as an engineer or as a medic, or I don't know? Tell us a bit about how you got there as well, right?
Yeah, of course. Wouldn't consider myself a software engineer. I studied electrical engineering at university, so I grew up in Australia and studied an interesting combination of electrical engineering and law. A weird background. And I spent a few years in consulting, and then was fortunate enough to have the opportunity to work at Google, and I've been there. That was about 7 years ago, so I've been there ever since. And yeah, it's been an interesting sort of journey. I don't have a medical background by training, at least, but obviously 7 years means that you learn quite a lot by necessity.
You'd kind of hope. And I mean, medical covers a whole bunch of things. Is it a particular area or set of areas or a discipline or an approach? You know, what is it about the medical side that you've got into?
Yeah, I mean, we have clinicians on staff, so I'm not employed to have to sort of make those calls. That's not what
Sure.
I do. So they're part of that cross-functional team I mentioned before. In terms of the products that I've worked on, I started on medical imaging. So I did a lot of work with chest X-rays, mammography, lung cancer CTs. So a lot of things in that space where we're doing screening for CTs, using these low dose CTs for that. There's lots of different
What
avenues there.
CTs? Tell people what CTs is, because
Sorry,
I'm also not a medic at all. So please.
CT is computed tomography. So it's, I think, historically known as a CAT scan. So it's a 3D image.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
excellent.
And
Good.
yeah, so medical imaging is where I began, and that's a lot of trying to understand what's really important in terms of, like, when you're looking at an image, when a radiologist or pathologist is looking at an image, what's the things that they're trying to get out of that, and how can we teach models a way of doing that
Okay,
and
so
on problems. Yeah.
we already got into AI, right? So I guess this is it's not just about it's not about sort of just cleaning up images. It's actually interpreting them. So that is what you're doing work in.
Yep, that's right. That's where I started. Of course, language models came on about a few years ago, and we've been thinking a lot about language and medical text as well. But
Okay.
my sort of start was all in imaging.
Excellent. All right. So I just want to come back to it in a minute, but I want to finish off your kind of journey in Google. What part of Google do you sit in, and is it different from other parts of Google? I mean, it's a big company, right? How does where you sit differ from, and how does it work with the other parts of Google?
Yeah, so I'm in a part of Google called Google Research, which is a sort of sister organization of Google DeepMind. And so we are sort of tasked with looking at the emerging technologies and applying them in ways that we think is interesting from a research perspective in general, or actually applying them to help other product areas at Google, things like Gmail, like search, like Google Cloud. So it's a kind of partnering organization where we're trying to bring the best and think about what's needed and what's possible with the emerging technologies, and then bring them and embed them into other parts, or just put out papers if it's more of an academic exercise.
Okay, that's interesting because I mean, you kind of think of Google as a pretty innovative company anyway, but you're kind of looking at the real cutting edge and thinking how that can be applied externally and internally for Google's projects and services, but also for the general good of humanity, right? Particularly on the medical side.
That's what we like to think. Yeah, we've
Mm.
put a lot of research out there. We've put a lot of models out there recently, and really it's just to try and increase access to this kind of technology in the medical space.
Well, let's go down that route a bit if you don't mind. So, access can mean a whole bunch of things, right? It can mean sort of usability. It can be just improving the technology. It can be regulatory. What are the sort of business challenges and barriers, particularly in the healthcare AI space that you've seen across the years? And I guess have they changed over the time? You said been the 7 years. Have you changed? Have they changed over that time? Would you say?
Yeah, let me just sort of think about those challenges. I guess depends on what your goals are, right? So our primary goal is to see how can we build technology that can give people and scale access to healthcare expertise. That's really what we want to do. And there's a lot of sort of challenges to doing that. Of course, the primary one you have to solve is building technology that's safe and accurate, and it's going to do that. But you have to also find a way of getting that out into the world and making it possible for people to access that and use it on a day-to-day basis. So those are different challenges. The first one's, I guess, more of a technical challenge. Like you're trying to make sure the model knows the right things and is able to perform at a level that you're comfortable with, and that's understandable. And then the other part is more of a business challenge, as you mentioned. And for us at Google, we're not looking to build these things ourselves. We're very much looking to enable others to do this. That's been the strategy. And so we are looking to empower other organizations who were trying to use these technologies in their day and take advantage of some of the compute and the data we've got access to. So that's where our sort of work in Google Research has come to bear.
Sure. You used a really interesting word there, which was safe, about safe technologies. What does that mean in the medical? I mean, hopefully not a laser that's going to cut through you like James Bond, right? It's not that type of safe. I guess you're not doing that. But what does safe mean? Do you see what I'm getting at? Because I don't tend to think of apart from safety critical systems, which is I suspect know what you mean. How does safe play into what you're doing? That's a really interesting word.
Yeah, I mean it's a word I guess that we think about in two different contexts. They're very related contexts. So I don't want to say that they're totally independent, but there's two contexts we think about. The one that is really governing a lot of what we're doing is if somebody wants to deploy some sort of medical AI, there's a good chance, depending on what the use case is, that that would be a regulated medical device. In that case, fortunately, we have regulators who have actually defined that and work out what safe is for them and what's required to get that out into production use. So that's one definition, of course, really important for us to think of those standards. And then we also have our own view of what we think is important and what we think how do we avoid harm on our own side, just as a sort of principles that we apply ourselves. Now we have to do the sort of union of those two things, if that makes sense. So both of them have to be applied, of course. It's not one or the other, but we do think about it from first principles, what we think is safe or not safe. And I think safe, and maybe I was a little careless in the language there, like, no, nothing is entirely safe. That's not the world we live in, but
Well,
is it safe?
nothing is entirely secure. Well, I come from the security side. We meet on that absolutely. It's about acceptable and understood levels of safety and security, right?
That's right. That's right. So yeah, I wouldn't say it's safe. It's just safe enough under whatever standard we're trying to apply.
Sure. Okay, that makes a lot of sense. So let's try and take an example of that. You talked about, I don't know, lung cancer or mammography. Give us an example of how you would apply what safety means, either from the regulatory point of view or from, Google's point of view. If you're happy to sort of dig into that a bit.
Yeah, of course. When we measure these models in those kind of contexts, we think about classification performance. So it depends on what the use case is, but one example might be in a cancer screening program, does the person need to get recalled for further screening? And so that could apply in both a mammography or a lung cancer situation where you're not going to do a biopsy just on the basis of one imaging exam, but the next step would be to get more imaging and then potentially a biopsy if there's more suspicions. And that's a really critical decision to be made. It's a classification kind of binary question, yes or no, recall or no recall. And so it's quite well suited to some of these AI models that do this classification task. So it takes the imaging from the patient, makes that decision, and very similar to what a radiologist would do. And so in that context, SAFE is really balancing two kinds of errors. Sensitivity, which is how many people that actually do have cancer are we not recalling? So if there's 100 people with cancer and we only ask for 95 of them to be recalled with 95% sensitivity, we call that. And then there's specificity, which is how many people are we recalling who don't need to be recalled? And you sort of can plot these things together and come up with something called a receiver operator curve, which defines the performance of that classification model. So that's the sort of primary thing that we think about when it comes to safety is what's the performance there. Now, obviously, in an ideal world, we'd be getting 100% sensitivity, 100% specificity, but it's not a realistic.
And
Um,
and humans don't get that either, right? They don't get anywhere near that.
they don't. That's right. And I think we've found in a lot of domains with AI that we're not really comfortable with applying human standards to models. We tend them to want them better. If we're going to include AI, I think we've seen this in self driving as well. We do want the AI to be performing better beyond any sort of reasonable doubt of the humans. And I think that I can understand the psychology behind that. So we set our own standards. Of course, it's in reference to what we think humans perform at, but there's a huge amount of variance in radiologists. So when we look at how good they are, it's not just sort of, depends on the particular radiologist, the patient population, the scanners they're using. So it's a slippery benchmark, but of course you can measure it. And we want to make sure that we're doing well there. That's one example of safety. That's like the raw performance. But you can imagine if you had a model, an AI system that was doing this and it was very accurate, but the UI was very confusing. And when the nurse practitioners were interpreting it, they didn't know if it when it said recall or it said don't recall, it was the text was a bit hard to read. This is a kind of trite example. Even if the model was getting it right, they didn't understand that output for whatever reason because we made it so confusing. That would still not be safe in that sense, right? From a human factors perspective.
So you're looking all the way through to the AI and the usability base. It's not just about the accuracy, it's about the usability of the output of that model as a system more generally.
That's right. That's what you think about when you build these systems. Now, we have, as I said before, we're not trying to build those systems ourselves, but we are
Uh,
thinking about working for people building those systems. So we're we're not taking as much of an opinion and providing as much support into that second part of safety, but I wanted to highlight it because it's really important
yeah.
when it comes to deploying these things. We are trying to make sure that you can get really high performance on that classification task out of the box with some of the models that we have. So you can really sort of step that up and get a performance that you're happy with less effort. But that when it comes to building the full system, yeah, you have to consider all the elements of it.
And is there a requirement on clinicians to sort of understand what's going on as well? Maybe understand how sensitivity may be different to humans. Is that something that you think about at all?
I think if someone was to build one of these devices, obviously they'd have to think about what the training looks like for users, and is in
Yeah.
this case, it's the physician, the user, probably it is, but there's different models here. Do I think it's good that physicians understand the limitations of these models? Absolutely. Like I think there's a trap here where the model can do very, very well, and then it finds some situations where it's not so good, and we don't have the right baseline understanding of those limitations, and therefore we can be fooled. So I think that's important.
But at the
Um,
same time, we don't want to be saying that all clinicians using these have to be experts in AI. That makes no sense at all, right?
no, no, and it doesn't necessarily need to be the one user at the facility, but if there
Okay.
was you can imagine having people watching and monitoring this performance of these systems, and they don't have to be like a one-to-one every physician using it has to do it. It could be allocated in a
In the
more.
same way, there's oversight of humans, right? You don't. Yeah, okay, that makes sense. Are there incentives for health providers to use these things? I mean, we said we want to be doing better than the humans in terms of those measurements. Do hospitals and clinics want to use these things? Do we think?
I think it's pretty clear to me in the time I've spent talking to hospitals and clinics that they all want to do the best job they can in these situations. So I think that's first and foremost, and they want to find the right tools to do that. Obviously, there's the economic realities for them and operational overhead. So employing these things are not free. Lots of people are claiming big results, and they sometimes overstate things, or it doesn't work the way
Yeah.
they advertise. So there's a understandable amount of wanting to make sure that it actually does work, and a reluctance to sort of just try everything. But I think there's no doubt that they want to do the best thing by the patients. In terms of the economics, I think it really depends on the health system. So obviously, the world has a
Wide
variety
variety. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. of different health systems, and they incentivize different behaviors and different business models. So it really depends on that business model. From our perspective, we're not in the policy world in terms of like what's the right healthcare system, what's the right way of incentivizing people. We just think that if we produce really good models, ultimately the desire of physicians to want their patients to have great experience, the desire of the patients themselves to have great experience, that will win out in the end. But I don't want to understate how complicated the intermediate part is, because matching healthcare services to payment can be very, very complicated.
Yeah, I mean, it's a people think that technology solves things, but business and technology solve things, right? It's never one on their own. Not that I want to go to that hugely, but the other thing that you need, I guess, well, you talked about the model. So I understand, is MedGemma the model we're talking about, the main model that you guys are working on?
So I guess just to sort of do a little bit of a um, fast forward. So we started off with these classification models. We
Hmm.
did in the breast cancer, the work in ophthalmology, pathology, mostly classification tasks. So saying, hey, can we do a yes, no answer? And then when we started to realize the power of the transformer and start to apply that more to healthcare, we realized that there's more we can do with this, and it doesn't just have to be binary outputs. These models can be flexible. They can take in complicated unstructured inputs and then produce complicated unstructured outputs. And so what we sort of did is we took the existing tools we had to analyze images, and we augmented them just this year with what we're calling MedGemma, which is a version of Gemma, Google's open source LLM, and fine tuning that model for medical use cases. Now, when I say fine tuning it, it's a developer tool, so it's very important
Mm,
that it's for developers to build on top of for a variety of applications. But it's not a model that you could just boot up and start having a doctor in a box. It's by no means that, and not intended
sure.
to do that.
Okay, so when you say you're extending them, I don't pretend to be an expert in this, or even or LLMs either, frankly. But it feels like maybe the difference between saying to a chatbot, "Did England women win the Rugby Women's World Cup in 2025?" We did. Yes, no, as opposed to build me a picture of all of the players from the Women's Rugby World Cup surfing or on a beach outside Los Angeles, right? So is it that type of change from a yes, no, or a simple thing to a much more complex thing? And what does that look like in terms of a medical model? What are you trying to get to?
Yeah, great question. Let me just sort of break down those two examples for you, if you don't mind. So in the
Please, yeah,
first,
yeah,
you said I'm going to give some text input, and they're going to get a text output. So I'm going to say, ask this
yeah.
question about the World Cup. I'm going to get a text output. Now, in your question, it was a yes no answer, and you expected a yes no answer, but
Well,
you
I
probably
expect the answer yes because we did, but yeah,
yes.
yeah.
And congratulations. But if you extended that question and said who scored the most tries, or what was the score, I'm sure you'd expect it also to sort of do that. So it's a unstructured output in that sense. It's a text output though.
Yeah.
Now, in the second example, I think you're looking for generating an image
Mm,
from a prompt. So you're saying I have these people, and I want to create this image. Now, those are quite different applications, and they both involve transformers, and they're both generative AI in a sense, but obviously the modality you're generating is different. And just to be very clear, that for MedGemma, it's a text output. It's limited text output, so it can be an image input, a text input.
Okay.
You're only ever going to get a text out in the current version. And for us, at least, and I'll say this sort of in November 2025, producing images in the medical space is probably less interesting for us,
Hmm.
just because people think about producing synthetic images to use training on and things like that. So trying to create sort of training examples. We haven't seen a lot of success with that. It tends to be textual information that people really want. It can be in sort of forms of like prescription information, lots of things, but text is primary modality that people deal with in the medical space. So we're less interested in producing images. But as you said, there's been a huge amount of progress in that space, and I think Nano Banana has been a bit of a hit. So we're excited to see how that evolves. But for our use cases, it's not less about generating images and more about taking images in as an input,
Right.
using them X, and then producing some sort of output and making some sort of determination.
Okay, that's really helpful. But so it sounds like I chose a bad example in terms of the output, but in terms of the complexity, things have really gone up over the last, what, 2-3 years or less than that?
Well, for us, to sort of, when I said extend, what I actually mean is we did actually produce something that has unstructured output. So how complex it can process information,
Okay.
that's really down to the model's performance and its ability to be good at what's doing. But before that, it wasn't able to produce any text really. There was like we went from zero text to truly binary information to something that could produce any sort of output of text. Now, whether it will make sense and be coherent is another question, and that's where we need to make sure the model's doing well. But that's the difference between these binary models, these binary classification models,
Yep.
these generative text models.
Excellent. So this is really interesting. And again, you keep saying things which kind of lead me on to the next thing I want to talk about. So thanks for that. And the thing you talked about was data just now. So first of all, I think I understand MedGemma is open source. Is that right?
It's an open model, so
Okay.
we've let it out there for people to download. That's right. It
Fantastic.
It's not open source in the sense that all the data that's been trained on us is available. So
And
there's
so
this.
that was kind of one of the next things I wanted to go to really is the importance of data, good quality data, but verifiable data, I guess, as well. When you are training, how does that look like to you? How do you worry about that? What are the how do you think about data quality and verifiability?
I mean, it's obviously critical, but it's critical at different stages of building the LLM. When it comes to um, this field, I think what we look for is very much it's a results oriented space. And what I mean by that is the way that you end up building the model is important, but the thing that defines success is whether or not it can perform at the end in a way that makes sense. And the reason I make that distinction is because when we think about the quality of the data, it becomes really critical in what we call evals or evaluations. And so this is where we have a range of different tasks that we're trying to measure the model's performance on, and we make sure that that data is high quality and that we have high confidence that the signal we get out of those evals is going to make sense and going to be agreed by a physician. Now, in terms of training, it's more of a volume game. And so, of course, it's important to have quality, but the models could be sensitive to a little bit of noise in that data. Um, but volume is important. And so there's a bit of a trade off. Now, of course, in an ideal world, you'd have huge amounts of really, really high quality data. But that's not always the world we live in. So we try and get what we can. And then we really make sure that the evaluations are good and they're independent in the sense that we don't have any data in the training and the data that's gone into building the model that then finds its way into the evaluation, because that's like cheating on the test.
Yeah, of course, and that doesn't really help anyone in the long term, does it? Um,
And not a
and
long
say, yeah, exactly. Okay, so and I guess you're dealing with data which when you're processing it is going to be quite often very sensitive. You got confidential medical data is by definition is generally considered very, very sensitive. And I know that confidential computing is one way of addressing that by trying to keep the data and the models both the integrity of that, so no one can put bad data in. So there's the verifiability that we talked about, but also making it possible to keep data sensitive, so it's not going to be leaking out, and you can't see that this computer tomography is of Mike Purcell's left lung. I guess that's a thing that we want to be doing. So have you been involved with any of the sort of collaborations that Google's been doing around that and confidential computing at all?
Yeah, and I guess there's maybe two different modes I just want to distinguish here. So the first is building the model, which is obviously where we come in and
Yeah.
thinking about like how do we get a model out there that we can provide, and making sure that model doesn't contain any, like, there's no personalized information someone could get out of it or anything like that. That's something that we think about. That's an interesting field. And then of course there's somebody who takes that model and says, okay, great, this is really helpful, and now I want to build this into, say, something that's going to help physicians analyze chest CTs, as you said. When they run that model, let's make sure that they are not accidentally, mixing up data or
Yeah.
exposing people's data. That's really critical, and that's where I think the confidential computing becomes really critical. And we call that running inference. So when you're actually running the model, it's sort of inference versus training.
With actual data that you actually want to be getting questions answered about, rather than the stuff that's giving you that. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, with
And
real people in production.
real people, rather than data that you've whether that was from real people or not, you've used it to train, and now you're doing actual clinical work with these people.
That's
And it's AI, and I believe that, like LLMs, you need kind of big GPUs to do this, right? Sort of NVIDIA B100s, B200s, things like that. Is that right?
That's right. Yeah. So there's two flavors of MedGemma. There's the 4 billion parameter model, which is the smaller version,
Yeah.
and then there's the 27 billion parameter, and that I think needs 4 A100s to run, somewhere in that kind of realm. So it's a big model. Now you can do
It's a beast. Yeah, sure. So using something like the B200, which also has the confidential computing built in, which Super Protocol have been working with MedGemma and Google Cloud, allows you to put all of that together and tick those boxes about the verifiability and the confidentiality that we've been worrying about, right? So 27 billion, that sounds like a big number. What does that mean in terms of a model, and why does that require such big, powerful machines doing stuff?
Yeah, I mean it's a big model. It's a big number, should I say? Although it's actually a relatively small number, in the sense that I think I said it needs 4 A100s. There's a way of running it on a single GPU. So when the Gemma 3, which was based off, came off, they said, hey, you can run this on a single GPU. So this is a
Sure.
small model. In the scheme of large language models, it's small, but in the scheme of most people, it's quite big. It's a chunky workload to work with. So why is that required? Well, it just so happens that when you want to run these things, there's a huge amount of memory required to load the model weights from the various layers, then
Okay.
do all these matrix calculations, store them, move them to the next one. And to do this in a way that it takes sort of any reasonable amount of time to generate each token. So it's about one token is approximately a word. In any reasonable time, you're going to get the output without waiting, a long time. You need to have this in a compute environment where that memory can be handled, because otherwise you're going to be swapping things out. It becomes very, very messy. And so this is why you need these large GPUs and TPUs to run inference.
So a TPU,
A tensor processing unit. So that's
which is specific to the mathematical calculations that are used for these particular types of models, right?
That's right. So Google has developed, I guess, an alternative to the GPU, the graphics processing unit.
Yeah.
And that's something that we run a lot of our AI on, but they are similar in what they do and how they can be used for running large language models.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. Thank you. So we've got a whole bunch of things going on here. We've got these huge models that are going to require lots of RAM, and they need to be able to run pretty fast as well. We've got confidentiality concerns, not just for the patients themselves, but also for regulators, right? That's going to be a concern. And I'm guessing also that well, I'm not entirely guessing, if I'm honest about it. I've talked about this stuff with other people as well, but there's the concern from the hospitals themselves in that they don't want to be sharing data with people that can be ripped off, basically, right? It's once you've given data to someone to look at, they've kind of got it, unless you're doing it in a confidential computing environment or similar, where it's protected. So all of these mean that you've got some very special things you need to be able to do, putting together maybe B200s from Nebius, which is a Neo cloud, using the Google cloud services, and MedGemma from Google, Super Protocol, bring all the bits and pieces together. And then you can actually start taking these training models, which are big, with real data from real people, and bring out either research data for the next stage of fine tuning, or the actual clinical data to make decisions. And where does your work stop, Rory? Where you said you're not producing the final pieces, but where do you see your work, and where do you see, and does Google kind of do further than that, or where do you stop in terms of your work and your interest?
Yeah, so from our perspective, we want to make this an incredible developer experience. So when people want to be able to use um, MedGemma or models in the future
Yep.
to build AI in healthcare, that they get really a great performance out of the box. It's intuitive to use.
Yep.
There's enough documentation. That's really important. And then to your point, there's compelling reasons to want to run these models in a confidential way, as you described. So
Yeah.
you want to make sure that we're working with people like Super Protocol who are doing this, so that it's easy to get MedGemma working there, because we think there's going to be demand for people to run it in that way. So
And
for us,
people like EMA, I believe, have also come up with some YMA, EMA Health, of actually doing anonymization to allow some of this to happen in ways which, again, gives that level of safety. Again, it's a different safety and security kind of working in different ways there. We've seen far more than sort of linear growth in AI over the last 2-3 years. Presumably that can't carry on forever unless we meet the singularity, of course, which I believe is a possibility. I don't know. I mean, who knows what that even looks like? But what are there things we can tweak? Do we need breakthroughs in things in the same way that mobile phones needed breakthroughs in battery technology? Is there an equivalent for AI, do you think, that would help us do that? Is it the memory wall? I know, what is the memory wall? I've heard of it, but maybe that's something that you can talk about as well.
yeah, of course, and I'm not certainly like at the cutting edge of the people building Gemini, but I think memory is an important thing here, where these models are incredible understanding what they've been trained on and replicating there. And if you sort of restrict their operation to that environment, then it works pretty well. But inevitably, people want to use these things by learning from the context they're being inferenced in. So if you're seeing, for example, if you had I'm just take an example from radiology. If you had a radiologist that noticed there was a particular very bad cold going around, they may adjust their their priors on the likelihood of one infection over another when they're actually looking at CT images, for example. So during COVID, obviously
So
being
what's a
aware.
prior? Sorry, before adjusting a prior, what does that mean? Sorry.
No, of course. When I guess when a radiologist looks at an image, there's all sorts of potential causes of that, and they have some prior probabilities of what that looks like.
Okay.
And
Yep.
when adjust a prior, you basically say, well, because of this factor, I actually think this is more likely than this, but then otherwise, I would have said, some other distribution. So it's just about it's a prior belief that helps you sort of think about the world. It's
Okay,
I
so
don't know.
it may be, if someone's a smoker, you have a prior expectation that the lung cancer is more likely, for instance, or as you say, you got a particularly nasty flu going around, that might up the chances of it being something else. That sort of thing.
That's right. Yeah,
Okay,
exactly.
right. Carry on. Sorry, apologies.
No worries. It's that kind of Bayesian reasoning. But yes, I think when you have a human, they're able to adjust to that. So COVID is probably a better example than a flu. But when COVID came around, of course, we we're getting all these chest CTs and chest X-rays that looked very different. And the radiologist learnt about what that looked like and how to distinguish from different things, and that happened in the space of months, right? Now, you can imagine today, if you didn't update the model doesn't have any memory, and so every time you fill this context window with an image or with text, it's always gonna give you, well, more or less the same result, unless you
So the
change the way.
context window is kind of the instance of it running, right? So every time you set it going, right? Is that right?
That's right, yeah, so
Okay.
you can think of it its whole sort of, um
Attention span.
yeah, its whole attention span, that's it's a good way of putting it, is
Okay.
just sort of contained in this context window. So we will initialize it with the same, system message. It will say we'll have a prompt that says, "You're a helpful medical assistant, et cetera. Your job is to do X, Y, Z."
Yeah.
And that's constant, and then we'll add something after that. But then once you wipe that and you start from the scratch, it doesn't everything that's happened before is gone. It's not saved
Yeah.
anywhere. It doesn't go anywhere.
And
But
human
that's not the way.
physicians remember this stuff, right? This is how we're
Yeah,
built. Yeah. Okay.
that's right. And sometimes, that memory doesn't actually help. Sometimes it creates biases that don't actually
Of
help them to the
course. Yeah.
fullest.
Yeah.
But we like to think, that we're a species that is learning overall and getting better, and so most of the time it does. And that's
Yeah.
a big challenge we have with, the sort of LLMs of today. Now, there's things you can do, to take that. So one sort of very naive way of doing this, and this is a well-known sort of approach now, is to sort of distill some learnings and put that out somewhere else, and then you can retrieve it later. So you can say, "Okay, model, what did you learn about this?" And then maybe it produces some sort of diary log, or it edits a diary log that exists, and then you can load that into memory next time. So it kind of has this very janky kind of, I don't know if you've seen the movie Memento, but every time he writes something on the card, and then when his memory gets reset, he can
He
rewrite the
can
card.
he
It's
can
kind of
go to
like
that.
that.
Okay.
It's a bit
And
like that.
presumably, again, going back to the security thing, it's really important that that is accurate and also the real thing that you've recorded, not someone sort of loading it who shouldn't be loading it or the wrong data. So the verifiability, which again we could get with some of the confidential computing capabilities, is also important there. So the correctness of that data, because if that's wrong, you're going to make things worse rather than better, presumably.
That's right. That's right. So it's critical, of course, that is, if you use that kind of technique, that you're saving and storing the memory in the right way. But there's challenges with that. Of course, it's hard to describe learnings. We don't really do that as a human, like as a human species. We kind of embed them in a less tangible way. And also, of course, if you learn more and more things, your context window gets clogged with all this stuff, and then that becomes tricky because there's only so much you can learn. There's not so really as much of an obvious limit to what humans can learn. So, I think it's like a sort of band-aid on a problem rather than the solution that we'll see. So that is something that's going to be really important, I think. Something interesting, at least in the medical field, is, unlike a lot of other fields, that the feedback is actually fairly, slow, in the sense that people don't always get the connection because of the way that the services are separated. So if a radiologist, thinks there's breast cancer in someone's, image, they may not actually know whether they got that right for many months, or maybe for ever.
Because there's a yeah, okay, because they need to be doing biopsies, and the patient may not turn up for all of their things, and then there may be okay, so yeah, as you say, it's not in most fields of endeavor for computers, if something works, it works, and you know about it pretty quickly. But in the medical field, because well, humans are humans, and but disease pathologies are weird anyway, and systems are complex, the feedback can take quite a while. And so, is there a challenge then of mapping that back to the original model, or what's the challenge?
I think it's an opportunity,
Oh, okay.
in the sense that if we want to build these learning systems, and let's say we solve the problem, we have a way of getting this feedback for the models, then what it will force, medical systems to do is actually create those feedback loops intentionally, because there's sort of a real big payoff because the models
Yeah.
will get better. I think we'll do a lot more institutional learning from that. So that's quite exciting.
So it
Um,
actually changing the way the humans and the human processes work because we know it'll benefit the technical models, and it's kind of a nice feedback loop. That's very nice.
yeah, I
Cool.
think that's a reasonable thing to hope for, at least, and I'd be
And
optimistic.
what can we do? And by we, I mainly mean you. You know, people in your sort of position to encourage that kind of feedback to improve. Do you think?
I think for us, of course, we have to deliver on the promise that if we had that feedback loop, the models could improve
Yeah.
and sort of make that pretty trivial. So one thing that we want to do as developers and our partners is to say like we can help you set up these learning systems where your data is and your patient population is very specific to you. The way that um, disease manifests in different systems is just different because of the instruments to use, the scanners to use, the patient population they have. So training a model that's general and only ever sees this general population models, it's going to limit your performance, I think, because
Hmm.
it is a very specific thing. And so making it easy from a technical perspective for these systems to benefit from using their own data is what we're trying to do. I think it's a journey. We certainly haven't finished there. And I think if we create that incentive, then we hope that they'll take up the challenge and say, well, there's something in it for us. We can see exactly if we get this data from here to here, there's going to be huge benefits. And that will sort of create the impetus to build that.
I hadn't really thought of it that way. In that, there's this thing about personalized medicine, right, and personalized research into medicine as well, I guess, which is offset at the same time because you need a huge data set to do that, but also awareness of the different um, circumstances of the diagnosis of the person. As you say, just different scanner may have different sensitivities because it's 5 years older than a newer scanner. And not to mention the fact this person may be living in an area which has I know higher air pollution. So there's a whole many different things. In order to get to personalize, you really need to be able to understand and process the general, and that's clearly quite a complex thing to do.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I think the upshot is that there's a huge amount of potential for us to continue to do a better job. And that's really exciting to me.
Cool. So, just a few final questions to round things off, if that's okay. What do we need to do better? What would your counterpart in 5 years maybe? Where would you be pointing him or her at? What are the things we've talked about some of the stuff, but what do we need to look out for? What can we really get a handle on now? What would be your call to arms?
Call to arms, the who, I guess maybe is my question. Who are we directing the call to arms to?
Um, People who are in the same field you're in, either the people who are doing the same job you're doing or the people you interact with.
Okay. I think we have to balance two challenging things. You know, we're in AI and AI is a fast moving world. So we want to make sure that medicine is going to benefit from that velocity. And so if we're too slow and we're too circumspect, then we won't those benefits will be slow. And I think that actually will translate into patients' lives being lost. So that's one sort of hand to balance. And the other, of course, is to make sure we do this safely and we don't put something out there that has limitations when unaware of and overstates its capabilities in a way that misleads people into using it in ways that can do harm. So I think that's the balance that we have to strike, and we think about this a lot. I think we're going to continue to think about this. It's going to be an ever present balancing act, but one that we have to take very seriously because either side of that continuum is not a great place to be. And we've tried to do that as best we can in our team, but like I said, we as every technology comes through, we have to think about this more and more. You know, I think the other sort of called out arms for me is I'd love to see, and we've seen this, but we continue to sort of encourage physicians to take an interest in this because it's likely to affect their world go forward, even if it's not them using an AI tool that maybe has been built with MedGemma or some other model. I think it will be interacting with patients who have talked to some LLM and now have, and it's kind of changing the way they think about medicine. They're going to have opinions and helping them educate their patients because there's going to be challenges with that, of course.
We already know that, people turn up at their doctor's surgeries having done, a search on whatever their search engine of choice is and have decided they've got particular diseases or syndromes or whatever, which is not necessarily the case. But that it will change even more, as you say, with AI.
That's right,
So,
and I think there's some really good stories of people finding some things out. So it's certainly not all negative, but
yeah.
it's going to be difficult for physicians to
And
manage because
challenging for physicians, absolutely. I think
yeah,
one of the things that, you've opened my eyes to in this conversation is the thing about safety being a bigger, wider topic than I had kind of thought of. I'm a security guy by background, and I think about confidentiality and I think of verifiability, but it's a much broader thing like that, particularly in the medical field, and even even in a one could say a fairly passive system, in that this is not something which is going to be used certainly in the near time directly to do surgery on people. This is a diagnostic tool, right? But even in that case, the thing about safety, whether it's patient confidentiality or giving appropriate sensitivities or whatever it may be, is vital to how you think about these things. And the other thing that I found very interesting is this thing about representing the claims of what things can do and what they may be able to do, and understanding what the things you need, the assumptions you need to think about, the capabilities, and what you're providing to it. That's been really interesting. So thank you very much for that. So my final kind of fun question I'm going to do, if that's okay, is, so Rory, it's very nice to meet you. We've never met in person. And I worry a lot about deepfakes these days, and there's always a danger that you could in fact be a deepfake. So we've spoken for quite a time, but I want to what I like to do is ask a question of my guests and see if they can explain something to me in a way which convinces me that you're a human. So you have to try not to think like an AI. So this I'm going to tell you is a metal cup.
Okay.
And I'm going to be drinking from this, and I want you to explain to me why what I'm drinking here is likely to be cold water. Go away. Far away.
Why I hypothesize that what you're drinking from is likely to be cold water. Well, I've got no idea that that's true, but let's just think about the context we've got now. I can see a clear liquid there, but of course, there's many liquids that are clear. The fact that you're able to drink from it and not thrown it up indicates that it's at least it's something it's edible, at least in the short term. That makes sense. And I guess I go to the psychology. So what motives do you have to deceive me? And I can't think of any, to be honest. It wouldn't make a lot of sense for you to pretend to be drinking vodka in this situation. So I'm satisfied that it's very likely that you're drinking water, because there's no reason for you to deceive me, and all the evidence points that way.
I think I'm probably going to accept that. Some of your language was a bit AI-like. Maybe you worked too much with AI folks. You didn't use the word delve, which was a great stuff. And also the fact that you couldn't think of any reasons I was deceiving you actually feels like quite a human thing to say. Bizarrely, because I think we've set up AI models to expect to be deceived quite a lot now. So that kind of works for me, I think. Sorry, carry on.
I was gonna say it's I don't know what to make of the fact that I used AI language instinctively. I tried to avoid it, but I guess it's too strong.
That's fine. It's all good. It's all good. Your awareness of that is also good. Rory, this has been great. Thank you very much indeed. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for the questions.